God, it's March 7th, and I've got a video to finish editing, but instead I'm reading op-eds, Atlantic ones. I just want to read just a bit here. Hang on. Okay, so it's a Biden article, blah, blah, blah. He's too old. People are pissed off about it. The White House is not listening. But here, the last couple of paragraphs of the article, it's so disgusting, this analogy that's being used. And I'm just going to read it out here because I'm genuinely curious how many people, when they see these kinds of analogies get used, how many of them think this is hyperbole and it should never be used in a political context. But here's how the Mark Leibovich finishes his article. It's another, Biden has betrayed the voters by staying on for a second term. He said he'd be a transitional president, and here he is. He said he'd be the bridge man, and he's not being a bridge man, and it's unfair to the voters. And I agree with the sentiment, but see how this article ends. So I'm going to start reading now. The plane has taken off. It is clearly sputtering. The pilot is not saying much. When he does, he sounds shaky. He is not inspiring confidence. A solid majority of passengers would much rather someone else were at the controls. They have voiced this concern repeatedly. And then in parentheses, for the record, the Federal Aviation Administration's compulsory retirement age for commercial pilots is 65. Close parentheses. But the flight attendants keep telling us it's too late. The plane is already in the air, and this is the only captain we have available. Trust us, he's in peak form. He's not senile. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. And so the article ends that way. This kind of plane thing has been used numerous times, notably the Flight 93 analogy in 2016. But here's a member of Team Blue using it casually, and I'm just wondering how many people throw up in their mouths a little or feel a little nauseous that politics, and indeed high stakes federal level politics, the presidency, gets compared to something like this. Because it doesn't matter if it were PM, if this were a Canadian kind of article, and instead of the president, it was about the PM. I just immediately start thinking what I can do. That's really where the analogy gets ruptured. Because in the case of a plane, it truly is the case that my life, if I were a passenger, it is 100% in the hands of the pilot. Who is actually going to say that their life, that the analogy is similar enough? Like, obviously, analogies are meant to be imperfect, but they're supposed to be similar enough. That's what makes them justified. Any analogy that's justified is one where the two things being analogized are similar enough, such that the fact that it's imperfect doesn't matter. There's enough similarity to justify it. But really, this whole thing, I'm supposed to think of the PM or the president as my pilot. Like, is it really the case that there's that many people who, when the country goes wrong, there's a kind of proportional effect felt in their personal life, such that they think there's enough similarity between the plane analogy and the horse race for the president and how the president does, that you kind of view the president or the PM, in the case of Canadians, as your pilot. It's so disgusting because in my case, and I don't think I'm that anomalous here, but really, whatever's going on, whatever I'm being told is going on with the country or the economy, we're going to measure the entirety of the economy and say how the economy is doing. It's so stupid. It's hard enough to do with all the variables. It's hard enough, especially if you want to tell a causal story behind why the economy's hot or in a slump. If you want to tell a causal story, it's hard enough to do with a single fucking city, let alone with an entire country. But anyway, all these people who are telling you the country's in a slump or the country's getting out of a slump, all this crap, do you really see it reflected in your personal life? I don't think many people do, but people in a zombie-like kind of way, they just go along with this. Obviously, I'm going to balk at an analogy that tells me to, in some, imprecise way, view the president as my pilot. No. When I'm on a plane, it's just the case. There's nothing I can do. If things go bad, it's because the pilot fucks up, or there's another pilot in another plane that fucks up, or, the mechanics go wrong or something. But the common denominator is there is nothing I can do. Whereas in all our personal lives, there is so much we can do that doesn't hinge on what the president does to, determine whether things go well or not well from here on out. It's just too dissimilar. Please stop using this fucking analogy. The president, the PM, they're nothing like the fucking pilot. We are utterly helpless and at the mercy of the pilot's capacities in the case of the plane. I don't think I've ever seen more of a gap between what is the narrative in terms of the threats and the solutions to those threats for public life versus what's going on with me in my personal life. There's just too much distance. It doesn't fucking matter. I'm not saying what happens politically has zero impact on me. There's all these things that are kind of hard to ascertain. These invisible impacts. There is that, but I'm just saying, just the older I get, the more independent whatever's going on in my life gets from whatever's going on in public. And that's why I just get I get a little triggered with these pilot analogies. And this audio is just to say, maybe you felt that, but you couldn't quite think it out. So now I've spoken it out. So next time you see this, just please speak back against it. The president, the PM, the leader is nothing like the fucking pilot. This is the most hyperbolic analogy maybe in the history of modern politics and as I've seen it, used in these bipartisan ways. You should be disgusted at this. They're assuming you hang on whatever's going on at the national level. That's what your individual life hangs on that. No, it doesn't fucking hang on that. Not in the way that my life indeed does hang on, my pilot getting drunk and, crashing the plane because he's too drunk and me being completely helpless in that circumstance. But also, this is why I never fly. I haven't flown since 2012, and I'll never fly again. Literally, even if this whole place goes topsy-turvy, I'm not going to fly. I'm not getting on a plane ever again. I don't want to put myself in a position where I have to trust a stranger I've never met, who I'm told because he's licensed that he's competent and I should feel okay about it. No, I'm not doing that. I'm never flying again. Just like I'm never voting again. I guess I trust pilot strangers in a way not to crash at any particular point where I might be at. So I know this is imperfect because trust is implicit. I trust them not to be clumsy enough to crash anywhere near me, even not just specifically where I am right now, because that would also traumatize me. I don't wake up worrying about the possibility, but yes, if I buy a plane ticket, then I start worrying about the possibility that the pilot who's going to be flying my plane might fuck up in some way. But they might fuck up in some way even when I don't buy a ticket and crash somewhere near me or specifically at me, leaving me either dead or incredibly traumatized. So there's an asymmetry there, and I don't much pay attention to it, but I still think that what I said packs a lot of punch. So I recognize that, there's trust in other ways, but yeah, I'm never flying again, and I'm not apologizing for it. Just psychologically speaking, something different happens when I buy a plane ticket. I just start feeling duped about, why do you trust that specific stranger who's going to be flying the plane for the ticket you just bought? Why do you do that? It's weak of you to do that. So I'll never fly again. But I recognize, I trust them in these indirect ways. But also, what option do I have? Let's say I didn't trust them in those indirect ways either. What the hell would I do? Get off planet Earth? Because there's always planes circulating planet Earth. I guess I'd have to fly to some island or swim to some island, I guess, where planes never circulate. I guess that would be the most appropriate thing. But there's a doing-allowing gap there, too, that explains why I don't do that. It's interesting how the doing-allowing gap figures in these prudential ways that don't quite, for me, extend to how it's applied in these moral ways. But when I start thinking about these, risk aversion from a doing-allowing standpoint, for me, psychologically, the difference between doing and allowing, like a risk, taking a step to do something like buy a plane ticket and what that implies for risk aversion versus not taking a step but still not doing everything possible to get to a different region, like an island, where there's no possibility that I can have a plane or any of these other, high-tech things do me in. This is what kind of, survivalists might be driven by. They actually take that too. They don't have one such doing-allowing distinction, prudentially speaking, for them, survivalists. So they go out of their way to inhabit these parts of the world where tech can't do them in. Maybe survivalists and primitivists. I just listened back to that, and I realized why I did it now. I never said it, why, but the framing now came to me. I felt the need to do that because what they present is such a hive perspective, all in this interwovenly, and ultimately we'd like to realize that we're all in this together, but the facts just are we're all in this interwovenly. And so yes, your president is your pilot because we're all interwoven. Would like to be able to say we're all in this together. Right now there's too much friction, but factually speaking, we're all interwoven. So they don't take the individualist perspective, they take the communal perspective, just factually speaking, right? You can't, maybe they don't think of themselves as these civic communalists. Maybe they don't think of themselves that way, but you can't make these kinds of analogies and essentially condition your listeners, your whatever readers, as civic agents construe themselves in these communal, first and foremost, communal contexts. And I'm telling you not to do that. Mine is the individualist perspective. This is how I think the only way you can start off carving out a kind of individualist approach to civics, where each of us takes our share into society to the extent that is minimally legally required. And once we fulfill those legal requirements, among them, it can even be, compulsory voting, fine. I'm not scared by that. I just think it's going to be ineffective at accomplishing whatever you think. But that's not off limits for me in terms of the civil liberties that I endorse and not endorse. But once that's done, there ought to be no social pressures for anyone to get involved voluntarily, because the legal chunk has already taken a big enough bite through taxes and any other kinds of initiatives, like even whatever you want to make me put my gender pronouns in the name of kind of civil unity through corporate unity. You want to make me put my gender pronouns in my email. I'll do it begrudgingly, but I won't bitch about it endlessly. But then once the work obligations and the whatever other civic obligations are done away with, that individualist ethos kicks in, where an individual who chooses to disentangle himself from any kind of civic participation so he can focus on his own maybe artful projects, that kind of person is not viewed in a negative light. That's individualist civics. And if the Anglo-American tradition and many of its representatives claim to endorse that, at least in these comparative, whatever, we're not autocrats, therefore we're more individualistic, you also got to understand it in this post-civic life context. The person who says flat out, I don't even vote because I don't want to waste too much of my time investigating the issue such that I believe I can cast a truly informed vote. A lot of this stuff just doesn't impact my life. If you guys were talking about issues that actually impact my life, like truancy laws and scholastic conflict theory, if you guys were even recognizing there's a conflict theory within the scholastic world that you also just take for granted, thinking that, having kids go to school 5 days a week from K to 12, with summers off and like a week in winter off, like you're grabbing too much of a bite out of their youth. And it's purely for societal ends. If it weren't for societal ends, it wouldn't be an assembly line. You wouldn't treat them interchangeably, 30 a pop per class. You would recognize that those similarities, if this is about them as well and not just for society, then you could not look past the assembly line approach. None of you guys talk about that because ultimately you are communal. You just think you're more individualistic because your governments don't disappear people and you have lower tax rates. But scholastically you are authoritarians. And in terms of your adultly approach to life, thinking you ought to start a family, you are disciplinarians. A lot of you worrying about birth rates as well. And there's just too much communalism baked into civic active life, the kind of activist life. That's why they're all so Antlike. And that's why they all feel these fears, the ones you see on the internet. These are some of the most individually incomplete people I ever thought I would see as an adult. Looking back now, this is just such ant-like behavior. Lie to your heart's content. Pretend your allies that you're in it with are not liars because it's ultimately a communal project. And we'll use the word America to reinforce that we're really focused here on a communal project, not an individualist one. I offer up the, at least once you've fulfilled your legal obligations to civil society, if your government's valid and legitimate, right, it can make this claim on you. It can make a minimal legal requirement claim on you. The reason my ethos for civics is individualistic is because in post-civic life, you cannot be socially shamed or pressured, because it will be understood. You contributed legally in that minimal amount, however onerous that is, such that if you never vote, you never donate, you never do anything, but you focus on your own projects, which are dissimilar from whatever's going on in society, you're not going to be construed as selfish or callous or anything like that, because it's an individualist ethos. And having just listened back to that, I realized what I did. My civics is libertarianism in reverse. You can't listen to those last few minutes and not realize that I'm just doing libertarianism in reverse. All this aversion to the social pressures, so once you fulfill your legal requirements, there ought to be no social pressures, whereas libertarianism tolerates all manner of social pressures and all manner of non-coercive things that might stifle a person's individuality, insofar as they can show that on their understanding of coercion, it is indeed non-coercive. But it doesn't matter how much social pressure there is, how much other kinds of, maybe even quasi state-protected entities contribute to those either cultural pressures or whatever else. There's a myriad of things that can stifle a person's individuality. And once they're locked in by adolescence, scarcely do I see an adult who fully escapes them. And there's just nothing, like libertarianism is completely disinterested and incurious about all that stuff. Libertarianism, in the American tradition, it's about those legal requirements. What legal requirements is the state going to make upon you? And we're going to construe it as individualist to focus solely and exclusively on those legal requirements and to say that those legal requirements ought to be as minimal as possible. There ought to be as few as possible. The state's role is to protect the border. The state's role is to have the courts do their thing in the interest of jurisprudence and to protect private property. And that's about it. It's a night watchman state. So Nozick, the most famous of those, at least in philosophical circles, really Nozick is just, from A to Z, Nozick is fixated on those coercive legal requirements and how much they can deduct from each individual in isolation. I'm not saying there's nothing to that. The legal domain is, like, what is legality? How much does legality deduct from you? But I just think it's preposterous. It's preposterous to pay zero attention to all non-coercive elements, or at least non-straightforwardly coercive. Things can be coercive. It's just hard to see. Sometimes you got to take a magnifying glass on it and take into consideration how one develops. Clearly, they were on one kind of trajectory pre-puberty, and then it went a complete 180. That's a kind of stealing. That's a kind of theft. It can be a number of things, but yeah, it's all ultimately the social pressures. You can't ignore them. So I don't accept libertarianism's framing that they are the true individualists and everyone else is a communalist or collectivist, because it tolerates just an endless amount of social pressures that can subvert individuality in those, not even hard to spot ways. It's just ways that, for whatever reason, the American libertarian tradition is utterly disinterested in, or they just prioritize at the very bottom of their list of concerns. No, I don't see why I would think my individuality more stifled if the state appropriates 1/4 of my earnings, right, which is pretty high. The state just takes away coercively 1/4 of my earnings. Like, why would that stifle my individuality more than a bunch of people who are truly dissimilar from me and who are repulsed by my perspectives and who expect me to sign cards when one of my coworkers announces that after a decade of trying, he's finally impregnated his wife. And then they're signing these cards congratulating him, and they're, now they're them being an expectant couple. And what do you think happens if I decide to go full-blown contrarian when they hand me that card? And the card is titled, a baby, I'm not going to get this right, this is not verbatim, but as best as I can summarize it now, a baby is a God's greatest miracle, or God's biggest miracle or something. Like, of all the miracles that God bestows upon us, baby is number one. That was the front of the card. Now, what do you think happens if I decide to go full-blown contrarian? It doesn't matter how much I preface my contrarianism with, guys, most of you are parents, please don't take any of this personally. It doesn't matter how many times I say, don't take any of this personally. We can have this as an impersonal conversation, and I can be your tutor. I can be your existential tutor and then try to inform you as to why. I'm not about to sign this stupid card. They've tried for a decade, first and foremost, and failed. What do you think the genetic quality of that specimen that they're going to create is going to be? There are no spring chickens, folks. One of the reasons they've been trying for a decade is because even a decade ago they weren't spring chickens, and now they finally conceived. And I'm supposed to sign a card as he was leaving, because now he's going on paternity leave. As he was leaving, I was gracious enough to say, this is the first time I saw him since the news had been announced. I was gracious enough to say, cheers to your new baby. That's about as far as I'm willing to go. No congratulations, none of that. But it had been a few weeks, and I had wrestled with the fact that I will see him before he leaves for his paternity leave. So I had wrestled with whether I should have the confrontation with him. I know he won't be able to hear it. He's joyous now. He's going to have a kid after failing to conceive with his wife. His, I don't need to make this ethnic, but, his wife that he got from China, but, it's not the way it sounds. It was, from what I understand, there was true romance there, but it must be said, his wife that he got from China, they've been trying for over a decade, and they finally conceived. And he's been there since 2011, so I've known the guy for a long time. He's one of the nicest guys you can think of, but just to tie it back to the kind of disinterest libertarianism has in those social pressures, realistically, state appropriates 1/4 of my earnings, hell, 1/3 of my earnings. That's going to bother me a lot less than having to work in an environment where I know I can't get into my perspectives. In a clear-cut case like this, they're not going to produce a genetic specimen that's going to be well-off quad genetics in whatever other way that kid's going to be well-off, maybe materially. That high likelihood that it's going to be one of these sickly people. Every now and then, there's just a person who just gets sick too often. They're going to, high odds, they're going to create just one of these sickly people. If her womb couldn't take his cum a decade ago, if they had to come up with all these additional gimmicks, it doesn't bode well for the specimen they create. But, this can be general. This doesn't need to be particular. I can just talk about how it's preposterous that you expect me to, even though I have criticized procreation, but only with the night crew. This is not the night crew that circulates these notes. So the day crew and the afternoon crew don't know as much as the night crew does, but, about my critical, contrarian stance. Just in terms of starting a family, what do you think this record is? This is a record that sums up why you ought not start a family. But then we can take it from the, what exactly are you creating? They're not able to hear any of that. And so I have to cower. And, I'm not going to announce whether I signed anything in terms of notes like that. You're going to have to guess. If you guess correctly, I'll let you know. But it's not going to be announced in the video. But I had to cower to the extent that the one time I saw him, just before he was going for paternity leave, I said, cheers to your new baby. Yeah, maybe that was enough of a cower. Why should I be in a position where I have to do anything like that? And why should I ever be handed a note that says, congratulations, or where I'm supposed to say congratulations by signing the note, where the front of the note is, a baby is one of God's greatest miracles, or something like that. No, that's a worse claim upon my psychology, even than having 1/3 of my earnings taxed and spent in ways that I dislike even. So, I don't know how individualists can look past all these post-legal things, or we might even say pre-legal things, and think them not mattering insofar as they're non-coercive. Well, they're psychologically coercive, I'll tell you that much. I got my dryer on. This can't wait, but I got my dryer on, so now it's a little more commotion. being in the new place in Coquitlam means I can actually do my laundry in my own damn place. But it also means the audios are sometimes going to have this commotion. It's lovely out here, but I'll get into that later. But just to tie a couple of loose ends, the colleague, I wasn't condescending. What I was saying, he's one of the nicest guys. He genuinely is. He's nice on autopilot, but nonetheless, you get the sense that inwardly he's nice too, even though this is one of those guys where I thought it was a professional only niceness, but then having interacted with him and having seen how he interacts with people outside of work, it's one of those people whose niceness seems autopilot, but actually there's more to it. I don't know, maybe this is like one of these people who has a zero affectation to him kind of good nature, that I could even assume something as horrible as like it's only a front at work. Like, no, he's this way outside of work. So it's one of these good-natured niceness types of people that are almost like a figment now of one's imagination, given how, or maybe I just spend too much time online. Maybe that's the problem. But yeah, that's him. And so he got the wife from China. I don't know what the backstory is behind it. I just know that per hearsay, because obviously I would never ask him, hey, is there true romance here? I would never ask him. It's this, gossip, hearsay kind of thing where purportedly true romance. I don't mean to, cut him short or anything like that. But he's got a speech thing that, you know what, I'm too gracious to get into here, but he's got a little bit of there's a throat thing he does. I'm not going to imitate it, but he has to make a throat-like exertion after, and especially in tense situations. And so maybe that's why he got the wife from China. He has to do a throat-like thing that I'm not going to mimic because it would be in poor taste. But he has to do it all the more frequently when there's these tense situations. And so what if that's also heritable? I don't think something like that can be heritable, but I think he's pushing late 40s. I should announce his age. I don't know if his wife is less than 5 years younger than him. She's definitely not more than 5 years younger than him. She might even be older and just has a younger look, but I would doubt that there's no way she's more than 5 years younger. So just to kind of give you a bit more of the data, they're mid and late, I know he's late 40s, but she's in the best case mid 40s. And so I don't think that's the right time. And so I stand by what I said. And also the kind of bullet I have to bite in this kind of reversal, libertarianism reversal, where the social aversions are taken a lot more seriously, perhaps even than legal kind of things that you don't want to do, but that you're compulsed to do. So it's like, what if someone just doesn't understand then? What if someone just simply does not understand that this person has fulfilled their legal civic obligations by not fussing about being taxed and, kind of maybe even compulsory voting, and their disinterest in the political scene still causes that other kind of observer to think them a coward, a traitor, selfish, and all these things. Like what happens then? Like, there's enough people like that where the political really matters to them. It's what we're seeing in America. Like, people who vote Republican will not marry or even court people who vote Democrat, and vice versa. And the friendships have really, and so the bullet I have to bite is that there would be legal correctives to this kind of stuff. If you show glaring kind of partisan, factionalist, Machiavellianism, if you display a kind of partisan, and here I mean American, we can use the American model, so either flagrant Republican style Machiavellian partisanism, or in the case of Democratic, those things would be subject to fines. I'm not even joking. That would be my civics. You can't be glaringly, self-indulgently Machiavellian partisan. Whether you're team red, team blue, team purple, doesn't matter. There will be fines when it comes to this stuff, because a lot of this stuff is why people are shamed and maybe even just not listened to when they don't bring that kind of partisan rancor to the table. Like, partisan rancor would be fined. It would be one of the things where it's like, it's not just that the state is gonna make you vote or these milquetoast solutions. No, I think a solution is you show that self-indulgent, glaring, oblivious partisan rancor. Like, you're essentially just showing how small-minded and parochial you are. Yeah, that would be subject to a fine. There wouldn't be huge fines, but if it fails to wipe out the behavior, yeah, the fines would get bigger, up to $100 a pop, right? So it's just like I would be coercive in this new area of life where coercion just has not been thought permissible. Right? It's not that you can't argue for your views in a hard line kind of way. You can be a zealot, but you can't essentialize other individuals to their political affiliation. The moment you do that, you're doing that Machiavellian kind of ultra partisan just rancor. It never solves anything. It just helps people blow off steam and maybe earn some camaraderie points with their fellow travelers. But that would be subject to fines in my kind of reverse libertarianism, so that we can actually achieve the least amount of individual stagnation due to this really silly, zealous form of moral judgment. Some people cow to this zealous form of moral judgment. We see it in the current GOP. They really cow to that judgment. You know, they talk about the people who are up for re-election. They don't want to end up like Liz Cheney, or they don't want to end up like so-and-so, one of these few people like Mitt Romney who spoke out against Trump, so it's about their careers. No, this is about much more than careers. These people stifle their individuality and their individual conscience and their true moral conscience because they want to avoid that kind of zealous MAGA shame that's only meant to be reserved for the Democratic Party. So I would just make all these things subject to fines, right? You can argue your views. The moment you get personal and the moment you display that Machiavellian tendency, man, that's where the coercion would be introduced. On second thought, this could never work in America. I know I used America as a model because it's just easy, because it's so damn binary, especially nowadays. I used America as the model, as a kind of good framing effect, but it probably shouldn't be used as any kind of framing device because it's just too damn incompatible with the First Amendment. What I want to do here, I do want to curtail speech in a sense. Like the worst of speech, we can all agree that this would be intended to curtail and correct for the worst of speech. The speech that just stifles individuality, as I just mentioned, as we can see. There's a bunch of people who, they don't want to have to vote for Trump, but they think they have to vote for Trump. Some part of their conscience is like, no, I don't have to vote for Trump this November. Nonetheless, they're going to vote for Trump. And it's not even just about careers. It's about individual kind of cowering and a kind of individual conscience surrendering because they want to avoid the worst of that MAGA ire. It's more than just professional opportunism. These people want to avoid disappointing a bunch of people in their lives who are overly judgmental and overly invested in politics. So I do think it stifles individuality. And I kind of treasure individuality. I think that's what we're lacking the most, both intellectually and just in terms of, attitudinally, behaviorally. I just see too many clones and drones. And so if you tell me that a speech policy that curtails what is ordinarily in America understood as free speech, the First Amendment, I don't think there's a single constitutional scholar who would argue that what I just proposed is compatible with the First Amendment. Anyone with a passing kind of familiarity with the American Constitution and the First Amendment would say, whoa, no, that is not something that can be done here. Maybe do it elsewhere, it can't be done here. Right? So if I had a chance to implement it, I guess it would be too much of a breach of the Constitution, so I wouldn't implement it in America, even if I could implement this elsewhere. But if you could just show empirically that it will lead to less stifling of individuality anytime people who get way out of line and who just go full-blown conjectural and assume the worst things about their opponents, if it's like, you can't prove what you just said, then it's going to be as damning as making a kind of, as what the sexual hawks do, and what the sexual hawks did when they beat up Duckman in the last video's graphic, right? Duckman was innocent in that episode, but nonetheless, the sexual hawks and the misandrists had their way. And then, 9 Lives qua Academe backs them up. Well, of course it does. It's a takeover, folks, But it's ultimately speech, right? To accuse someone of sexual misconduct who is innocent, that's just speech, right? Well, yeah, but it's kind of damaging speech. So if you think about damaging speech that we are willing to prosecute, like with sexual hawks and, these believe all women, I'll say it now, believe all women, That's kind of them's fighting words, sister. Believe all women means disbelieve all of the accused, who are in vast majority of cases men. But it's speech at the end of the day, right? It's just speech to accuse someone of sexual misconduct. That's speech. That's a pretty damn strong and damaging accusation, right? So we should, if we can show that you've done it maliciously, you can be prosecuted for it, even though it's just speech. And so in a similar kind of way, I want to say, though it's incompatible with any kind of understanding of the First Amendment that I have, I want to say ultimately, yeah, you assume the worst about a person simply because of their political affiliation and how they vote. You talk about you talk about people in these mass chunk kind of ways, you know, the way people did with races not that many decades ago. But now they just had to project it elsewhere, so they found a neat little mouth-breathy mainstream area of life they can do it in. Politics, of course, that just came in to fill that kind of hole that was left behind. People need to decode the world in groups. It's why there's still people who insist on talking about the IDW. Remember the IDW, the Internet Dark Web? Like, this hasn't been a faction, if it ever was. It hasn't been a faction since something like mid-2019. And yet, people are so group-minded because they feel like they're part of a group. So even a group that lasted, at most, as you can argue, like a year and a half, lasted most like a year and a half. The intellectual dark web, this, the Weinstein brothers, Sam Harris, I guess Jordan Peterson was kind of in there. Ben Shapiro was kind of in there. Like, this is not, these people are in no way affiliated. They're doing their own thing, and yet people still drone on about, it's the intellectual dark web. Usually people who are themselves very, very factional in terms of how they think when they commentate. They got to make their team advance, and they got to make their opponents plummet before they do anything else. It's not about accuracy, inaccuracy. It's not about wisdom versus foolishness. No, it's about making their cause, really, through their group, making their cause advance. It's about the cause. These are causey people, right? It should be fined when you damage a person's reputation. And you see a bunch of your people, like, people dogpile after an accusation is made. When people dogpile to reaffirm that accusation, even though it's demonstrably false, like calling someone a pedophile, or, misconstruing what Sam Harris did a couple of summers ago when he was talking about the Hunter Biden laptop. Like, a defamatory claim gets made, and then there's a dogpile to affirm in different kind of half-clever ways and means the defamatory claim. This should be subject to fines. Should be subject to fines when the blues do it, when the reds do it, when the purples do it. It should be subject to at least starting to a minimal fine, because I think I think there's probably a lot of people who are too afraid to just voice any kind of view they have because they don't want to run into stuff like this. And even if I achieve that level of notoriety, I might rethink continuing to upload content. Because think about having that kind of defamatory claim circulate that quickly and having that many people line up to dogpile style affirm it. It's defamation. It's defamation, but it typically goes unchecked because it just gets chalked up to political speech. But very often what I'm seeing in America, political speech does amount to defamation. It's just their robust understanding of the First Amendment. The First Amendment's robust commitment to speech makes that hard to really think about critically. But so much of what I'm seeing as that it's construed as political talk is just defamatory of specific individuals. So yeah, that's why I would try out a kind of monetary penalties to see if it can be corrected. And certainly, if you tell me in advance it can be corrected and it leads to less individuals self-stifling, I mean, like, if you value individuality, I don't see how you can say that's impermissible from a freedom standpoint. Like freedom has to be interlocked with individuality and a kind of arc, a coherent arc from the time you're born to the time you die. Not an arc that's stifled here and there by things like, puberty and judgment and, other regarding forces. We want to create a society where there's as few other regarding forces stifling individuality. Libertarianism in reverse.
Okay, obligatory meta segment to the video. I mean, the video is like half meta anyway, but this is, I guess, kind of doubly meta because I'm actually showing the work in progress. Yeah, all the visual crap, but this is one of those things where I just have to choose, and what I choose for the visuals can impact what I was saying differently. So
are in no way affiliated. They're doing their own thing, and yet people still drone on about, oh, it's the intellectual dark web. Usually people who are themselves very, very factional.
see, when I was recording the audio initially, I didn't mean the two of them. It just occurred to me after the audio that the two of them are kind of tight and are even more tight now than they were in the heyday of the IDW. So I had to take the shot visually at the two of them and their, shall we say, grubby nature. But if you actually listen to what I'm saying, I'm actually criticizing the critics of the IDW for pretending that there's still an IDW. Save for these two, there isn't. So now just to play another few seconds of this, just so you guys get the sense that I wasn't, like what I was saying originally in the audio was meant to be a critique of those who are so sharply critical of the IDW because they know they're very groupy, and who still pretend the IDW is a group because they can't fathom how it's not, because they can't fathom individuals just doing their own thing and commentating.
In terms of how they think when they commentate, they got to make their team advance, and they got to make their opponents.
I mean, it does apply to these two as well, but I had to include this in the visual, but then I didn't want to break from it too fast. And so this could have been a wholly, entirely different visual. I could have just used people who are these obsessive kind of critics of the IDW. But maybe I'll do that in the video after, or something like that.
Plummet before they do anything else.
I think I know why the focus on the family groups have always seemed so distant, in terms of just me being unable to even fathom how it's not dead on arrival for everyone. The focus on the family groups. They have to spin inherently virtuous story about maybe the typical family, or, there's always the exemplar family, usually nuclear family, but it doesn't have to be. But that's been the model because, focus on the family is an American political kind of heavily lobbyist group, an activist group. Focus on the family, why does it ring so hollow? Why is it dead on arrival? And it comes down to the believability, like we can all suspend belief when we watch all these dramas, or I don't know what else, tragedies. If you're into plays, right, you can suspend your belief, you can forget for a brief moment that you're watching fiction, because everything is perfectly believable. And what makes those things enticing and believable is the kind of corruptibility of family life. It's usually when family members are at odds that these dramas and tragedies are, become sublime. Scarcely are the families all nicely aligned against some outside force. The tragedy in the drama is truly, the conflict is often within the family. It's family member A up against family member B. And the sheer, I don't have trouble deciphering that. Like that's where I see IRL. I see a lot of, especially with in-laws, marriage as in-laws conscription. Why would you ever do that? Why would you ever invite these two individuals? You don't know them from Adam. So, it's very likely if she's great, it's very unlikely her parents are going to be great. But, you're going to sign up for in-laws because you're just going to need the state to recognize your relationship that bad. But yeah, all these things, some of this explains the conflicts within familial life. And whereas the focus on the family groups always try to put a big old halo on kind of, the typical family. And the family is always disturbed by external forces. No, it's just, you guys are just, you just paint the factually untrue picture of the family. Family dynamics have calamity baked in them. Especially in a free society where individuals are allowed to be, free of, you have the freedom of guilty conscience, right? Unless you go and hurt someone else. But in terms of what you believe, you can speak it and be free to not have a guilty conscience for it. But, there's a lot of stuff you're not supposed to say in the interest of the family. So it's inherently a socially censorious group. Faith, freedom, and family. When you see this, the freedom is the most questionable of the three. I agree, they have a lot of faith. I agree, they pack a lot of a kind of pro-family prescriptive force. But the freedom part, no. It's to be discounted. You can see the socially censorious ring from ever since, the satanic panic on to today. There's a through line here. There's a certain psychology that is susceptible to this sort of stuff. It's that focus on the family psychology that gives into satanic panics and wants to make you believe that because, transgender people, at least some of them, are merely looking for a discourse. No, we're going to treat all of them as if they're looking for something more than a discourse. Because truly, you don't want to give trans ideas a fair and impartial hearing, right? I'm not saying once you give them a fair and impartial hearing, they'll pass, but so many people clearly can't even come to the table in ways that don't poison the well in advance. And it's these very kinds of socially censorious focus on the family people who always vote Republican, who, like libertarians, are also saying you should vote Republican on the current election. Oh, and I absolutely meant what I said. If she's great, it's high odds, and IRL, it's something that's always been the case from what I've observed in others, but there's going to be high odds, let's just say for the sake of covering my ass, there's very high odds. If she's great, she couldn't have had great parents. It's the one source of adversity. She would have had adversity starting from the periods onwards, just qua periods, but in terms of the other kind of sources of adversity, it would have had to have been because she couldn't have had great parents. She had in either neglectful ways or in overly helicopter parent, disciplinarian ways, hardline, scholastic, thugs, Amy Wax kind of ways, Amy Chua kind of ways. In one or another way, she would have had bad parents, and that's what built character in her. Scarcely or ever IRL do I see. Because what else is going to give them adversity? Adversity, it's a cliche, but adversity does build character. I can see some adversity when they start getting their periods, but if she would have faced adversity from scratch in peacetime, we're talking peacetime now, and she doesn't have some sort of disease or anything like that, it's going to have to be because she couldn't have had great parents. She must have had moderate to less than moderately good parents. So I'm absolutely meant. That wasn't meant to be a kind of spoof of anything. I wasn't parroting any manosphere, and that is truly what I believe. She can't have had great parents. Her parents have to be scumbags, and therefore, marriage as social capture is a track, but ultimately it's marriage as in-laws conscription. If you think she's great and you want to have her parents be your in-laws and thus be in your life to some, a higher frequency than they are now, why would you have even met them? Really, if you're not cohabitating, if you're not planning to get married, why would you have even met? Because if she's great, it can't go well. If she's great, they have to suck. And if she's doubly great, she'll recognize that they suck. And then one of the best things you can bond about is how you both had sucky parents. That's going to be there's only a finite number of things one can bond with a woman with. So if she's great, she must have had sucky parents, because that's one of the sources of how you bond. You both bitch about, as a guy, you might try bitching about your folks to your male friends, but you kind of get the sense that they're not exactly that interested to hear, where she's all over it because her parents suck too. But then it's stupid. Marriage is doubly stupid because it's in-laws conscription, and they're going to be sucky people. And even if they're not sucky people, how many new people do you need as a male adult? How many new people do you need who, in this case, would be 2 decades or 3 decades older than you even? How many of such types do you need in your life? How much cross-generational awkwardness and quirkiness and you stifling your own individuality around them as your in-laws, even if they're nice people, how much of that do you need as a self-respecting, freedom-loving male adult? Marriage as in-laws conscription. You listen to the Petersons, you listen to all those trat types who are just pimping this marriage stuff in with more ferocity, seemingly with each passing year. They're truly panicked. Ties into this birth rate stuff. Ooh, how I will tie all this together very soon with a chapter readout. But they never tackle these problems. It's always there's these calculating, diabolical, Pinky in the Brain style cultural Marxists who have plotted to destroy the family. It's no, you guys are ignoring that family is in-laws conscription. Why would you want, as a self-respecting, freedom-loving adult male, maybe this can be extended to the reasonable women too. As a woman, why would you want
the guy you're fucking, let's say you even cohabitate, why would you want his parents in your life by getting married to him? Even if they're nice, do you think you're going to have much in common? It's especially for the men, I think, it's just when you're interacting with in-laws, it's just where kind of male identity disposability and males stifling their individuality, it's kind of at its peak. And this is, there were some of the things that movies have depicted too, right? Ben Stiller, and they were even married, right? Ben Stiller versus Robert De Niro as her father. I think these movies left a stamp on me because it was the kind of friction I would always see, especially back in Serbia. In Eastern Europe, the culture is kind of more open about the hatred between the in-laws and the, both ways. And then the in-laws of the respective couple truly hate each other. Like in Eastern Europe, this is more of an open thing. The West conceals this. And this is why someone like Peterson can be anything other than a clown. The Peterson defense of the marriage, like they'll never go near this. If they went near this, they would have to grapple with in a truly open society, in a truly socially open society, in-laws will be as openly contemptuous of each other as they are in at least the city I grew up in. I can't think of anything to the contrary. And I assume it extends throughout Eastern Europe. Maybe that's a jumpy assumption. I shouldn't make these jumpy assumptions, but for Pete's sakes, steer clear of marriage, even if her folks are nice, because well, you know what? If her folks are nice and she's great and her folks actually have a lot in common with you and you want more older people in your life, I guess then, okay, then Peterson's right. But I don't think he's right. I don't think that applies to the vast majority of self-respecting, freedom-loving men. And we can talk about freedom in personal context. The reason liberty, civil and economic liberty, has that halo is because it's usually said as freedom, not liberty. But freedom is something that gets its halo because we think about it in terms of personal freedom. The man who does not love solitude cannot love freedom. There's something I need to do research for, and it ties into this video, but I want to upload this video faster than that, so I'm not going to do the research by the time the video goes up. But what explains the East-West asymmetry in terms of in-laws on the husband side and the wife side, those in-laws hating each other with such ferocity as I've seen it in Eastern Europe? Don't know Eastern Europe from A to Z, but I think I know it fairly well. What explains the kind of openness in those cultures that the couple's respective parents will hate each other as a kind of couple one versus couple two, whereas it's so, there's a kind of affectation in the West that conceals it, and it's not even that. That's just my speculation that an affectation conceals it. What it could be is just these people meet when their son marries their daughter, and they just never see each other again. I think that might be the case as to why they don't even get a chance to truly get to know each other to the point where they can hate each other. And maybe it likewise goes for their new son-in-law. Like they remember their new son-in-law from marriage day or their daughter-in-law from marriage day, and then it's scarcely ever interactive following that. So that could be a thing, but it's not something I've done research for, but it's an interesting area, is it not? In Eastern Europe, you had to interact a lot with your, because there was more of that residential extended family thing, even in the cities by that point. People just knocked on each other's doors or even just, came into each other's homes. It was normalized. What is the track? Uninvited house guests. Yeah, it was okay to be an uninvited house guest in Eastern Europe. It's not okay. It was by the 70s, the 80s, the 60s even, I think. It was never okay in the West to be an uninvited house guest. So maybe in Eastern Europe, you get to grow, if you grow up, born and raised, you get to see some of the worst of the family because it's just more open. You see the people who get to know each other as in-laws and then their respective parents. And it's just, there's just so much more familiar friction because you could be an uninvited house guest. Whereas maybe in the West, they don't get a chance to get to know each other and to thus hate each other. And that's what keeps the whole charade going. But it is a charade. And this is the kind of secret weapon. This marriage as in-laws conscription, it's all bad. There's no upsides. If she's great, you don't have to marry her, right? If she truly is great, why involve the state? You can even make a libertarian case for this. Why involve the state, especially if you're a man? It's lopsided. It's going to favor her. She might have something diabolical underneath her skirt. You never know. You never know. Never say never. You can be 99% sure, but you never know. Why involve the state? But yeah, it's the secret weapon is marriage as in-laws conscription. You invite these people into your life where it's like they're probably not going to like your folks, and maybe rightly so, because like you recognize your folks suck. Like it's just a lot of people suck, and they recognize that a lot of other people suck, even though they suck too, right? People recognize the Achilles heel of the other people who they dislike, and they kind of essentialize them to their Achilles heel in terms of where they fail morally the worst. And in-laws are kind of good at spotting each other's Achilles heels. And so, like, why would you want people like that? Why would you want to invite all that drama into your life? I ask in jest. I know why they want to do it. It's a procreative strategy for stability. And I spew a lot of venom about that whole thing and how the two things merge. But those audios are going to be reserved for the next video. But I know why they invite all that drama into their life. It's the same freaking reason the dung beetle spends so much, exerts so much self-sacrifice to build the nest that it doesn't even benefit from, and all these, instinct analogies that I can't articulate because I'm not shop. I'm a third-rate shop, but it is very interesting to think about. They invite all this drama in their life because they need stability in their lives, and this, for all its drawbacks, you have your in-laws you can rely on. Maybe they're rich, right? So in terms of a stability as a procreative strategy to raise your young, to give them that nest where, grandma and grandpa, if they're around, they can watch the kids while both the parents work, right? But dad kind of hates grandma and grandpa, but that's okay. Dad will stifle himself. It's okay. Daddy can stifle his individuality when grandma and grandpa are around, and so can mommy, for that matter. Because if grandma and grandpa are in our lives, they can watch the kids while we work, and both of us need to work because it's pricey to have two kids. So why do we have two kids to begin with? Well, it's good that we had two kids to begin with because we must serve the species or the nation. But those. That kind of venom that I spew, that's got to be in the next video, even though the audios were recorded roughly around the same time. So enjoy this outro that preps you for what's to come in the next video. I just have to shorten these videos because, yeah, I am ridiculous in terms of my length expectations. I am ridiculous, but I'm having a ball, so I don't even care.